On the Way Home is proudly supported by Elliston Community Builders. Community Builders has become a national leader in affordable housing. We've done it by developing innovative initiatives that can change the way Canada builds. Community Builders provides certainty as a service, managing developments from concept to occupancy. We help with early-stage feasibility, design development, funding, and active project management to deliver communities Canadians can be proud of, from coast to coast to coast. So if you need more affordable housing faster, please visit communitybuilders.elliston.com to learn more. That's communitybuilders.elliston.com to learn more.
You're listening to On the Way Home with your host, Michael Braithwaite.
Welcome, everyone, to this episode of On the Way Home. I hope you're having a wonderful week. Thank you for listening. As always, we bring you very, very interesting and brilliant guests. This week is no exception. Before I get to that, I should tell you that I work at Blue Door, and that's the group bringing this podcast to you. Blue Door is an organization that works in the northern part of the GTA, York Region, Durham, Peel. We work with our most vulnerable, finding them affordable, deeply affordable housing, and that might be in the form of emergency housing, transitional housing, permanent housing, housing with supports. We run a construction social enterprise called Construct that's put over 500 people into the trades to build the housing we desperately need. And we run some healthcare services because if we're able to get people healthy, they can hang on to their housing and much, much more. If you want to check out the work that my incredible team of people that are much more talented than I am are doing, go to bluedoor.ca. If you ever want to reach out, you have an idea for a podcast, you're doing something really cool you want to share, just send me an email at michael.b@bluedoor.ca. We'd love to chat with you and have you on. That's what this podcast is all about. It's about talking about the challenges that we face, and there's many in this sector right now, but it's more importantly talking about the solutions that rise up and face those challenges head on. Today's guest, Meg Davis from Waterfront Toronto. She's the Chief Development Officer. They're doing just that. I mean, it's incredible to think that Waterfront Toronto, as Meg tells us, was born out of a failed bid for the Olympics, right? Toronto wanted the Olympics. It didn't happen. 3 levels of government that have been working on that bid together, federally, provincially, municipal, the City of Toronto, came together and said, you know what, we should do something though. And Waterfront Toronto was born. And they've done all sorts of projects, creating hundreds of units of housing, and more importantly for this podcast, hundreds of units of affordable housing, working with nonprofit partners, the city, the province, the federal government. It's incredible. They don't just create housing. We've talked about this before. Housing is great, affordable housing even better, but we need complete communities. And they do that. They put in parks and trails and commercial and full communities, so people can actually go and live and thrive in these communities. She talks about some of the communities that they put in. And they do this under the land that they're using many times, and Meg talks about this, is contaminated because they've had industrial companies there. It's where they kind of dumped remnants of construction debris, etc. And so there's a lot of work. And very complicated work where they've diverted rivers, and it's incredible, creating new communities, and the work is far from done. It was fascinating to listen. And, in this sector, if we're going to rise to the challenge to end homelessness and create the housing we need, we have to be creative. We have to think differently. We have to come together. And Waterfront Toronto is doing that, working with 3 levels of government, nonprofits, and many, many other partners to get things done. I think you'll really enjoy this podcast with Meg Davis from Waterfront Toronto. I certainly did, and I learned a lot. Let's go to that podcast now. Good to have you here today to talk a little bit about Waterfront Toronto. Before we get into that, I want to ask you the standard question we ask all our guests that come on the podcast, and that is, what does home mean to you?
Well, first of all, thank you, Michael, for having me. I'm happy to be here. And I did spend some time thinking about this. I think of home as family. I think a lot about my parents and the home I grew up in. I think a lot about my own children and my husband and the home I'm in now. it's a safe place. It's where I can be myself. It's the place of love. It's also the anchor in my life. It's sort of where my physical being and my mental being go to be comfortable, safe, welcomed, and loved. And I feel very, very lucky to have that kind of experience.
That is an awesome answer. So we hear a lot of different answers, never about four walls on a roof. People talk about family, as you did, safety. Jesse Thistle, a famous Indigenous author, whose quote is "Home is love," which I love. But I love what you said, anchor. That's what it is. It is that anchor that anchors us all. So very nice. Thank you for that. We always try and learn a little bit about our guests as they come on the show. Most of us in life did not say this is, in our lower grades said, I'm going to be this when I grow up, a chief development officer. We didn't know what that was probably. But can you talk a little bit about your path into the work you're doing now?
Interesting. I actually did know at a young age that I wanted to be in planning, building, development. I took a great course in grade 12 in urban studies, and my teacher was amazing, which can happen when you have a great teacher. It sort of sends you in a certain path. So I did study planning and urban development in university, but I've had a whole curvy path, like lots of people. I did start in planning for some developers, but then I ended up doing some consulting for many years with one of the big accounting firms, KPMG. And then luckily my path landed here at Waterfront Toronto. And I joined here in 2007. And while I wouldn't have guessed a long time ago this is where I'd end up, I would say that when I got here, I knew I was where I was meant to be, and that this was my perfect job, my landing pad. I knew from the moment I started here I would retire here. It's been 17 years, so and I got a few more to go, but I love the combination of the development side, the private sector type work, but also combined with public policy work that we do here. So it just was a perfect balance of my background and all the twists and turns of my journey. Sort of all came together in this one spot. So I feel very lucky to be working here.
Very cool. And I think Waterfront Toronto is very, very lucky to have you working there. And the contributions you've made over the 17 years, incredible. For people who may not know, this is a national podcast. And we try not to be too Toronto-centric. People get upset. But talk a little bit about the history of Waterfront Toronto and its purpose.
Sure. So Waterfront Toronto is, in fact, a tri-government agency. We were created out of a failed Olympic bid. I think it was back in the late 1990s. We were bidding for the 2008 Olympics. Canada was not successful, but the three governments, the City of Toronto, the Province of Ontario, and the federal government, were already joined hands in creating the Olympic bid and thought, we've got some attention, we've got some momentum here. Let's create an organization, which is now called Waterfront Toronto, out of this momentum to revitalize Toronto's waterfront. So it did bring that commitment from all three levels of government together. We're owned and funded by all three to this day. We do have other sources of revenue like land that we purchased, land owned by the city, by the province that we then sell, and that also brings in revenues. But largely, we are funded by all three levels of government, and the mandate is to provide complete communities on the waterfront, supported by public realm, parks, open space, infrastructure, transit, remediation, and as we make those upfront investments, we increase the value of the lands that we have carriage of. So, for example, in East Bayfront, which is right here on the waterfront at Queens Quay and Sherbourne, land was owned by the city, and we have serviced it, remediated it, built parks and public spaces up front. And so the land is worth more. And then we have contracted with private sector through competitive processes to come in and build the communities themselves. So the affordable housing the retail, the commercial, the market residential, to really create these amazing animated spaces. And we also do all the planning approvals, upfront planning, master planning, zoning, etc., to take away the risk from the private sector. Large portions of the lands that we are revitalizing are old industrial lands, with very little around it. So we have to entice developers to come here. And so we have to create sort of the conditions that make it worth their investment and that they'll know they'll be successful. So we do that planning work up front to give them confidence. And then they take on sort of the market risk and the construction risk. And then they create the communities for us. So we wear a lot of different hats. And we work with a lot of other waterfront agencies very, very closely, like Ports Toronto, like CreateTO in the city, TRC, the Toronto Region Conservation Authority, Toronto Community Housing. So we work with a lot of partners in order to deliver these complete communities.
Yeah, and it's really incredible what you've done. Can you speak a little bit about some of the past projects, and of course, because this is mainly a housing and homelessness podcast, about some of the housing projects and affordable housing projects that you've completed?
Mm-hmm. Well, so Waterfront Toronto, when I arrived here in 2007, we hadn't built any buildings yet. Lots of planning work being done, lots of environmental work. And one of the things that we had committed to was to deliver 20% of all of the units in the waterfront as affordable rental housing. Definition by city standards, 80% of average market rent. But no one was looking after that portfolio. There wasn't anyone here at Waterfront Toronto who knew anything about affordable housing. And so I kind of put my hand up and said, I would like to be, part of this. So working with community leaders, the city, we had a task force on affordable housing that did a lot of work to understand what was possible and what role Waterfront Toronto could play. So we started off with setting aside land sufficient for 20% of the affordable housing. So if I use West Don lands for an example, and this is where the province owned the majority of the land. And in 2007, we were working with Toronto Community Housing, and the lands are located sort of south of King Street, west of the Don River, north of the rail corridor, over to about Parliament Street, roughly. So it was about 80 acres, and we were working with Toronto Community Housing on an initial site. So it would be the very first site that we did. And we then negotiated an agreement with them. We worked with the city to get the approvals, and we worked with the development community who were partnering with TCH to actually build the project. And we were able to secure approximately 250 affordable rental housing units. The larger of the two buildings was for seniors, and the two smaller buildings were largely for single moms. And we delivered a park right beside it that is actually weather protected. It's called Underpass Park, so that, on a rainy day when your kids are driving you crazy, you could take them to this park right next door and have a dry and safe place to play. It's right on King Street Transit. The King and Queen cars are right there. So we really thought a lot about the location of that site as our first site. And it's been very successful. The architecture is fantastic. And so that was our very first project. And then in the West Don lands, along comes the Pan Am Games 2015. So in about 2009, the province asked us, could we fit a athletes village in West Don lands? And we looked at all of the work that we had done, the master planning, the built form, and we said, yes, we think we can. So we did a variety of test fits, and in fact, that was the site selected to go forward. And then we won the bid. We had to actually build it. So one of the delivery, we worked really closely with the province and Infrastructure Ontario on that. But one of the things that was required by Waterfront Toronto was the 20% affordable rental housing. And the province initially was sort of saying, well, this is an expensive piece of infrastructure, this whole project. Are we going to layer on another component in affordable housing. But one of the things we looked at was at the Olympic Village in Vancouver for the Winter Olympics, which was struggling at that time very, very badly. Leading into 2010, I think the developer went bankrupt and the city had to take over. And there was just a tremendous amount of market risk. And so to avoid that, the affordable housing isn't market. You don't have to rely on condo sales for that. And so there was a significant number of units. I think we were in and around another 250 units that could house, I don't know, I think there were 5 athletes per bed, per 5 beds per unit. So it could house all these athletes and not carry with it that market risk. And so we worked closely with the province and the City of Toronto to run a request for proposals. And we built 2 buildings, one with Wigwaman and one with Fred Victor. And we built the units. They were used temporarily by the athletes for a few weeks. And then after the games were over, they were converted to affordable housing units. And they have commercial on the ground floor. They have access to public space. They have amenity spaces. They're right beside George Brown College. They're right on transit, the Cherry Street Transit Loop, which comes down from the King Car. And then, of course, the Corktown Common is a 20-acre park that we built before Pan Am came along. And so there was access to that beautiful public space and all of the Lower Don Trail system for walking and, for your kids and then biking and hiking and all of those sorts of things. So there's also retail available. There's a YMCA right next door. We really tried to be thoughtful about making sure we had the amenities for the residents in the affordable rental housing units. And then the other piece that was early but is being delivered now, we're working with Anishinaabe Health Toronto, and they're an Indigenous hub, which has a health facility, has some affordable rental housing as well. So that's all being delivered in the West Don Lands. And then we did one other project early on. Again, sort of this was a step. So all the units that we built in West Don Lands were what we call set-aside sites. So the sites were set aside. We worked with the city and the other governments to get funding and the nonprofits or the providers, and then we built the buildings. In the case, so we were trying to progress the model. So in East Bayfront along Queens Quay, we did a project with the developer who's building the condos, which is Tridel and Hines. And we stratified 80 units in a condo building. So it's like having land in the sky. And those were owned by the city, and they had a long-term lease with Artscape. And I think that actually Artscape's had some problems, but I think they are still the lead leaseor on those units. And so we have 80 units for artists to live and work in the waterfront. And so that was sort of the next progression in the model. And we're trying new models in some of our future projects that we're hoping will be exemplars for other projects.
Yeah, it's an incredible work, Meg. I mean, when I think of, you've contributed hundreds of affordable units, which are desperately needed right now more than ever. But you talk like complete communities too. We're talking about transit and trails and parks and I know even education with George Brown now on the waterfront too, and that's incredible. You know what? I was there a while ago, just as a segue. I was walking through, and I don't think the students quite appreciate the fact that their campus is on the water. I mean, I walked out and had my lunch there, and it was so beautiful. There's a couple students there, but what a gorgeous campus to have, right? I mean, complete communities with transit too.
Well, and I love the George Brown element of East Bayfront. We also have them in the student housing in West Don Lands. And I think, we're going to have a public school here. We're going to have a public school in the West Don Lands. We have in East Bayfront, we also have a city-owned community center, 25,000 square feet. And we'll have 2 daycares. One is open already here in one of the condo buildings in Bayside. And then the other one is in the George Brown building, their second building that they're building now, which is mass timber. And it's going to have a larger child center. They're going to use that for their education program, for their ECE, early childhood education program as well for training. And so I have to say, George Brown has been an incredible partner. We worked so closely and so well with them, and they bring so much vibrancy to the waterfront. And you're right, there they are right on the water, but there are, I think, 5,000 students, 3,200 faculty, and they're expanding. They just bought the chorus building. They're really placing their bets here, and they're here all year round, 24/7. It's very lively. And I think having the students here, it's a harsh winter down here. So if you don't have things to do down here, it's hard to get people to come. So having the students here really allows for the restaurants, the cafes to survive. And it's helped others make investments. Like Daniel, City of the Arts, which is across the street from the George Brown project, they've invested very heavily in a lot of community facilities within their own building. They have launch pad. They have a variety of different, I think OCAD has space in there. George Brown has space in there. So, as you create these communities and you build the transit and you build the parks and public space, it encourages others to invest in the area. And it looks so different here now from when I started. It was just a couple of old buildings and I think a nightclub. And now we have such lovely places for people to come, Sugar Beach, Sugar Common, walk along the water's edge. It's lovely. So. Yeah.
And listen, I mean, development is always complicated, but I went on a tour recently of some new pieces that we're happy with, the new bridges. Julius from your team, just a brilliant man. But understanding, as you earlier said, the pieces of land you're dealing with many times have multiple different issues. You're diverting water away from floodplains, including, I want to talk about, as we talk about the future, talk about Villers a little bit, because this is a planned community for, I believe, 100,000 people. That's a number. Is that right?
Yeah, 100,000 is the amount of people that will reside from Yonge Street over to Villiers, including Villiers. Okay. Villiers will be about 15,000 new residents, so about 9,000 units, of which we're targeting 30% to be affordable rental.
It's affordable, but that's on land. That's a community in a sense that you're creating out of nothing. That is unusable land. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I mean, I've seen old aerial photographs of Portlands, and there are all these massive white circular buildings that are oil fields. So if you can imagine, all of that land was originally fill placed in the Portlands where the mouth of the Don came out from all the excavation for all the tall towers in downtown Toronto. So it is terribly, corrupt soil. It has all kinds of, remnant wood and pieces of this and that, concrete in it. But it also then had a lot of industry on top of it and became very contaminated. It's also very mushy. There's a lot of peat underneath. So we've had to do a lot of work to improve the soil, to figure out where all the contaminants of concern are. And then on top of all that, we're actually rerouting the river. So the Don River comes down to the lake and has a hard right turn at the Keating Channel, man-made channel. And we ran a competition back in the early 2000s and brought on the winning proponent, who actually kept that Keating Channel, but proposed to carve a whole new naturalized river and outlet to the harbor as if it had been there all along. And that project is almost complete. We've opened the south end of the river as it meets the lake, and that water is now naturally flowing into the riverbed. And then we will be opening the top end where it comes down the Don Valley, I think in October, November of this year. And then, 100 acres worth of parks and public space will be also available and open to the public by next spring. So Villiers is surrounded and it creates an island. So I wish I had a picture, but if you build the new river, it actually creates an island between the river, Keating Channel, and the harbor. And so Villiers is just completely surrounded by parks and playing fields and a fabulous public art trail. So there'll be public art all along the trail. And as you mentioned, the beautiful bridges that have been installed really start to get people interested in coming down to a part of the city that was really just industrial, vacant lots, no vegetation, really not pleasant. A nightclub. Seems to me that nightclubs kind of, are always there first. And so we're going to build 9,000 units with the help of the private sector. And I think we'll see some purpose-built rental, 30% affordable rental. We'll be building and commercial space, sports, hopefully some sports facilities, some interim activation. We're looking at having, if we can, a series of temporary uses that could be used for beach volleyball, could be used for a concert, lots and lots of opportunities for people to come down and enjoy the waterfront. So we're very excited about Villiers, and we've just done the rezoning, and we're progressing on the next steps of starting some design for the infrastructure. There'll be a lot of public investment. The governments are, working on how these investments can be made to bring all of these benefits on, for future people to live in Villiers.
So incredible. And so you've got lots going on now. We'll keep you busy for a long time. Any future plans? I mean, the work's never done. What are some thoughts for the future beyond the projects you've mentioned?
Well, so one project that's near and dear to my heart that I'm working on all day, every day, 24 hours a day, is Quayside. So Quayside is part of East Bayfront and Keating. Sort of, it's in and around the same area. So it's part between Sherbourne and Parliament, north of Queens Quay, south of the Gardiner. It's about 12 acres. We will be delivering about 4,000 units, and of those, about 860 will be affordable rental. We're targeting at about 23%. Those units, all of the units will be delivered at the same time because they're largely strata. We're trying to integrate as much of the affordable housing as we can into the market buildings. There is one standalone building that we will have along Queens Quay, and that will have an urban farm on the top of it. There'll be a number of, I think, 2.5 acres of publicly accessible forest within the development. There'll be condos, purpose-built rental. There's a community care hub that we'll be working with community partners on for health services. There will be a variety of restaurants and retail, grocery, and we're working with a development partner, which is a combination of Dream and Great Golf, called Quayside Impact Partners Limited, and they are very committed to sort of the impact investing. So I think they've got about 25,000 square feet committed to rental at 40% regular rents, so that startups, innovators, can come in and afford space there to create sort of an atmosphere of connection and cooperation. Dream actually owns the distillery district. So they're very interested in the model they used there, which was to have discounted rents to get the place buzzing. And then as it becomes very popular, you can build some condos and make your money back. So they're very interested in making sure there's some continuity between the distillery district and, Parliament and Queens Quay, where Quayside is. And so we're going to be delivering a very substantial project. Also, Waterfront Toronto will be building Silo Park, which is right beside the old concrete silos that are on the east end of the harbor. And so we'll be able to utilize the views of those concrete silos, which are historic and will remain. And then a large destination cultural facility. We haven't figured out exactly what that is yet, but it'll be right on the water. We see in our minds perhaps an entertainment venue, a theater with other venues, perhaps a cultural facility like an expansion of the ROM or the AGO or something like that, where we can bring people down, 24 or 12 months of the year, every day, all day. And even in the cold months, have people coming down to the waterfront. So Quayside's very exciting. We're going to be working with not-for-profits on the affordable housing. The city will own all the affordable housing and lease to the not-for-profits. And we hope to have shovels in the ground by the end of 2025 and be able to deliver some of those units.
So exciting. And I think, as you know, I learned more about Waterfront Toronto and just was blown away by all the activity that's happened, is happening, will happen. It really is incredible. And listeners, if you're visiting Toronto, check out the waterfront. It is not what you remember. It is incredible and only getting better. Hop on a bike, keep it better, and take a pedal around. Meg, if people want to find out about all the awesome things happening at Waterfront Toronto, where can they go?
So we have a website, waterfronttoronto.ca. It has all our information there. It's very navigable. I'm a bit of a techno peasant, and even I can use it. So, and we are located on the waterfront, 251 Queens Quay East, and we're happy to have visitors and point things out and show people around a little bit. So definitely pop onto our website and have a look.
Well, I'll tell you two things. Waterfront Toronto offices are gorgeous, and as they should be, are on the waterfront. Very nice. But you mentioned Mitchell Cohen, who is coming on the podcast soon, and I actually went to visit him on the waterfront, and wow, what a view from his office of the waterfront, right? So he's heavily invested. Well, listen, thank you so much for taking the time today. Thank you for all you do at Waterfront Toronto and the important work you're doing around housing, and even more importantly to this sector, affordable housing is so appreciated. And when you're doing other projects, we'd love to have you back.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this. So
thank you, Meg. We'll see you soon.
Okay. Bye. Thanks.